My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm 31 years old. And 2 months ago, my boss stood in the middle of our open office, in front of my entire team, and asked me if I was always this slow, or just pretending today. Not quietly, not as a joke. Loud enough that people stopped typing. Loud enough that chairs turned. Loud enough that someone actually laughed. And then more laughter. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to make it real. I remember the way my screen blurred for a second, the cursor blinking, waiting, like even it expected me to respond. I didn't. I just nodded, forced a small smile, and said, "Got it." Because that's what I'd learned to do. What they didn't know was that 19 days later he wouldn't be my boss anymore. But to understand how it got to that point, you need to understand something about Daniel Reeves. Because that moment, that wasn't new. That was just the first time it happened out loud. I started at Halcyon Analytics when I was 27, junior operations analyst. Nothing impressive on paper, but stable, predictable. The kind of job where if you kept your head down, did your work, and didn't make noise, you could build something. At least that's what I thought. My boss, Richard Hale, had a different philosophy. Richard didn't yell. Not really. He performed. Every correction was a show. Every mistake a demonstration. He had this way of pausing before speaking, letting the room settle, making sure everyone was listening. Then he'd pick someone. Usually me. "Daniel," he'd say, leaning slightly against the edge of someone's desk. "Walk me through what happened here." Simple question. But never simple. Because it was never about the answer. It was about the audience. The first time I thought I'd actually done something wrong. Missed a data flag. Overlooked a discrepancy. Something small. I explained it. Calmly. Clearly. He nodded. Then smiled. "Interesting," he said. "Because to me, it looks like you didn't check it at all." A few people shifted in their seats. I felt it. That shift. That quiet awareness that something was happening. And no one wanted to be in the middle of it. "I did," I said carefully. He raised a hand slightly. Not aggressive. Not loud. Just enough to stop me. "And yet," he said, looking around the room now, "we're here." That was it. That was the moment. Looking back now, that was the first sign. Not the mistake. The pattern. After that, it became routine. Weekly meetings turned into opportunities. Not for discussion, but for correction. If something went wrong, it somehow traced back to me. If something went right, it was the team. And I became very good at something. Staying quiet. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I told myself it was temporary. That if I just improved, worked harder, paid more attention, it would stop. So I adjusted. Double-checked everything. Then checked it again. Arrived earlier. Stayed later. Documented my steps. My processes. My decisions. Not because I planned anything. Just because I needed to survive it. But it didn't stop. If anything, it got sharper. One afternoon during a client review call, Richard pulled up a report I'd spent 3 days building. "Let's take a look at Daniel's work," he said. My chest tightened slightly. He scrolled. Slowly. Too slowly. "This section here," he said, tapping the screen, "feels rushed." It wasn't. "I can walk through the logic," I said, keeping my voice steady. He smiled again. That same smile. "No need," he said. "I think we can all see it." Silence. Then someone on the call chuckled lightly. Not malicious. Just going along. And that's the part people don't understand. It wasn't just him. It was the silence. The way no one interrupted. The way no one said, "Actually, that looks fine." The way it became easier to let it happen than to challenge it. And over time, something in me shifted. Not anger. Not even frustration. Something quieter. Clearer. Because I started noticing things. Small things. Patterns in how decisions were made. How reports were approved. How numbers moved between departments. What I didn't realize yet was how important those details would become. It started with a discrepancy. Minor. Easy to overlook. A set of figures that didn't align with the source data. First, I assumed it was mine. I rechecked everything. Twice. 3 times. Still there. So I traced it back. Through the system. Through the revisions. Until I found the change. Not mine. And not random. Intentional. At the time I didn't say anything. I just noted it. Saved a copy. Moved on. But then it happened again. Different report. Different numbers. Same pattern. Same kind of adjustment. And each time it connected back to one place. Richard. I didn't react. Didn't confront. Didn't even acknowledge it out loud. I just started paying attention. Because something in me had already clicked. And I wasn't trying to defend myself anymore. I was observing. Learning. Waiting. And that's when everything began to change. First, it didn't feel like a plan. Felt like clarity. The kind you don't notice right away. The kind that builds quietly in the background until one day, everything just makes sense. I stopped reacting. That was the first real change. No more explaining myself too quickly. No more trying to correct him in the moment. No more rushing to prove I wasn't the problem. I let him talk. I let the room settle into his version of things. And then I documented everything. Not obviously. Nothing that would raise attention. Just small habits. Saving versions of reports before and after review. Timestamping changes. Keeping email threads intact instead of trimming them down. At the time I didn't think much of it. Just felt safer. But over the next 2 weeks, something became impossible to ignore. The discrepancies weren't random. They followed a pattern. Numbers adjusted just enough to shift outcomes. Performance metrics slightly improved before executive reviews. Losses softened. Gains amplified. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough to make things look better than they were. And every change traced back through the same path. Approval. Revision. Finalization. Richard. I didn't jump to conclusions. I couldn't afford to. So I kept watching. Quietly. Carefully. One morning, about 10 days after that first public humiliation, we had another team meeting. Same room. Same setup. Same energy. Richard stood at the front going through quarterly performance. Everything looked strong. Stronger than it should have. I noticed the numbers immediately. Because I had seen them before. Before they were adjusted. He clicked to the next slide. Solid improvement across the board, he said. A few nods around the table. Then his eyes shifted. Toward me. Daniel, anything you'd like to add? He asked. There was a slight edge to it. An invitation. Or a setup. I felt the room tilt just slightly. Waiting. Watching. At the time I didn't think much of it. I just shook my head. No, looks good, I said. And that was the moment everything locked into place. Because I saw it. Not just the numbers. The system. How easily perception could be shaped. How much people trusted what was presented. As long as it came from the right person. And how dangerous that trust could be. After the meeting I went back to my desk. Opened my files. And for the first time I didn't just observe. I organized. Side-by-side comparisons. Original data versus final reports. Change histories. Access logs. Nothing illegal. Nothing invasive. Just truth. Clean. Verifiable. Quiet. Looking back now, that was the second shift. Not emotion. Not reaction. Strategy. But I still didn't act. Because timing matters more than evidence. Anyone can make an accusation. Not everyone can make it land. So I waited. Watched. Built. And then something happened that accelerated everything. An internal audit was announced. Routine, they said. Standard procedure. But I saw the way Richard reacted. Just for a second. Flicker. Gone almost immediately. But it was there. What I didn't realize yet was how much pressure that would create. Over the next few days he became sharper. More controlled. But also more aggressive. Mistakes were called out faster. Corrections delivered with less patience. And once again they landed on me. 3 days before the audit review it happened again. Another meeting. Another room. Another audience. He pulled up a report. Mine. Or at least my name was on it. This, he said, tapping the screen, is exactly what we can't afford right now. My stomach tightened slightly, because I recognized the numbers. But they weren't mine anymore. They had been adjusted. I opened my mouth slightly, then stopped, because I understood something in that moment. If I corrected him now, it would disappear. He'd pivot, reframe, dismiss, and the room would move on. So I didn't interrupt. I let him finish. Let the silence settle. Let the room accept it. And then I nodded. I'll review it, I said. Simple. Neutral. Controlled. He watched me for a second, like he expected something else. But there was nothing. And that unsettled him more than any argument could have. After the meeting, I went back to my desk, opened the file, compared it to my saved version, exactly as I expected. Changes. Subtle. Strategic. Traceable. And this time, I knew what to do with it. Because the audit wasn't just routine. It was an opportunity. Not to expose him. Not directly. But to let the truth surface on its own. I compiled everything. Carefully. Chronologically. Patterns, not accusations. Data, not opinions. And then I did something very simple. I made sure the right people had access to the original files. Nothing dramatic. No emails saying, look at this. No warnings. Just visibility. Because once the audit team started digging, they wouldn't be looking for perfection. They'd be looking for inconsistencies. And now, there were plenty. The final meeting was scheduled for Friday. Full leadership. Same conference room. Same screen. Same audience. Only this time, Richard wasn't the one controlling the narrative. And as I walked in and took my seat, I realized something. This wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about alignment. Truth catching up to performance. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for him to speak. I was waiting for the numbers to. The room felt different that morning. Same table. Same chairs. Same polished screen at the front. But the energy had shifted. Quieter. Heavier. Like something was about to be uncovered. And everyone could feel it. Even if they didn't know why. I took my usual seat. Second from the end. Left side. Not hidden. Not central. Just where I'd always been. Richard stood near the screen, composed as ever. One hand resting lightly on the table. The other holding a pen he kept turning between his fingers. A small habit. One I hadn't noticed before. Now I noticed everything. The audit team sat across from us. 3 people. Neutral expressions. Laptops open. Notes ready. No tension on their faces. Just process. And that's what made it different. Because this wasn't performance. This was verification. Let's begin, one of them said calmly. Richard nodded. Stepped forward. Started speaking. Same tone. Same control. Same confidence he always had when he owned the room. He walked through the numbers. Quarterly growth. Efficiency improvements. Margin adjustments. Everything looked strong. It always did. But this time, he wasn't the only one with access to the story behind them. About 10 minutes in, one of the auditors raised her hand slightly. Can we pause on that last report? She asked. Richard stopped mid-sentence. Of course, he said smoothly. She turned her laptop slightly. There's a discrepancy between this version and the archived file from 2 weeks ago. Small sentence. Quiet delivery. But it landed. Hard. Richard didn't react immediately. Just stepped closer to the screen. Probably a revision, he said. We update frequently. Of course, she replied. That's normal. A pause. Then. But this change doesn't appear in the revision log. Silence. Not the usual kind. Not the kind filled with discomfort or secondhand embarrassment. This was different. Still. Focused. Like the room had narrowed to a single point. Richard's pen stopped moving. Just for a second. Then resumed. Let me take a look, he said. He leaned in. Scrolled. Clicked. Calm. Controlled. But I could see it now. The delay. The fraction of a second where he didn't already have the answer. Looking back now, that was the moment. The shift. The same kind he used to create for others. Only this time he was the one inside it. The auditor didn't rush him. Didn't accuse. Just waited. Because truth doesn't need volume. It just needs space. After a few seconds, another auditor spoke. We're seeing similar inconsistencies across 3 reports, he said. He turned his screen. Side-by-side comparisons. Original data. Final submissions. Differences highlighted. Clean. Undeniable. I didn't move. Didn't look around. Just watched the screen. because I'd already seen it all before. Just not like this. Not in the open. Richard straightened slightly. That's unexpected, he said. Carefully chosen words. Not denial. Not acceptance. Just distance. We can pull the internal logs, the first auditor said. See where the changes were made. Another pause. This one longer. He nodded. Go ahead. And then they did. Access logs opened. Timestamps. User activity. A clear path. Step by step. Until it reached the same point every time. His credentials. No one spoke immediately. Because there was nothing left to clarify. No interpretation needed. No context to reshape it. Just fact. And for the first time since I'd known him, Richard didn't fill the silence. He stood there, looking at the screen. Then slowly he turned. Not to the auditors. Not to leadership. To the room. Like he was searching for something. Control maybe. Familiar ground. But it wasn't there. Because this wasn't his room anymore. Is there an explanation for this? One of the auditors asked. Neutral tone. Same as before. No pressure. No accusation. Just process. Richard opened his mouth slightly. Closed it. Then, I'd need to review the full context, he said. Measured. But thinner than before. The confidence wasn't gone. Just fractured. And that's when something subtle happened. People stopped looking at him the same way. No reactions. No whispers. Just a shift. The kind you can't reverse once it starts. The meeting didn't explode. There was no dramatic confrontation. No raised voices. Just questions. More data. More confirmations. And with each step, the gap between perception and reality closed. Quietly. Completely. I didn't speak. There was no need. Because this was never about what I could say. It was about what could be shown. And now it was all visible. After about 30 minutes, the lead auditor closed her laptop. We'll need to escalate this for formal review, she said. Simple. Final. That was it. Not a verdict. But a direction. And in that moment everything changed. The meeting ended shortly after. Chairs moved. Laptops closed. People stood but no one rushed out. Like everyone needed a second to adjust. To recalibrate. Richard gathered his things slowly. No urgency. No sudden movement. Just quiet. As he turned to leave, his eyes passed over me. Briefly. Not long enough to hold. But long enough to register. Recognition. Not of what I did. But of what I didn't do. I didn't expose him. I didn't confront him. I didn't fight. I just let the truth arrive. And that's what made it unavoidable. I packed my bag. Stood up. Walked out. Same as any other day. Except it wasn't. By Monday morning he was gone. No announcement. No explanation. Just absence. His office cleared. His name removed from the directory. And a new interim manager assigned. People talked, of course. Quiet conversations. Speculation. But nothing official. And I didn't correct anything. As I didn't need to. At the time I didn't feel victorious. There was no rush. No satisfaction the way people imagine it. Just stillness. Like something that had been out of place for a long time had finally settled. A few days later my new manager called me into a meeting. Different tone. Different posture. We've been reviewing your work, she said. I nodded. Calm. She glanced at her notes. Then back at me. There's a level of detail here that wasn't being recognized. I didn't respond, because I'd heard something like that before. Just not like this. She leaned forward slightly. We'd like to move you into a senior role. More visibility. More responsibility. A pause. Direct reporting. I held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. Okay. Simple. No performance. No speech. Just alignment. As I walked back to my desk, something felt different. Not the job. Not the people. Just me. Because for a long time I thought staying quiet meant being overlooked. That not reacting meant losing. But I understand it differently now. Silence isn't weakness. Not always. Sometimes it's position. Sometimes it's patience. And sometimes it's the space you give the truth to speak louder than you ever could. The office settled into a new rhythm after that. Quieter. More measured. Meetings felt different. Less performance. More discussion. People spoke a little more carefully, listened a little longer. And for the first time since I joined, I wasn't bracing myself every time someone said my name. At the time I didn't think much of it. I just did the work. Same desk. Same systems. Same routines. But the weight was gone. Not completely. Just enough to notice the difference. A week into the new structure, something small happened. During a team review, one of the analysts made a mistake. Nothing major. Just a misaligned data point. The kind of thing I'd seen 100 times before. The room paused. I shifted. Waiting. Not for the mistake. For the reaction. Old habits. The new manager glanced at the screen. Let's walk through it, she said. Calm. Direct. No performance. No pause for effect. Just process. The analyst explained. Adjusted. Fixed it. And that was it. The meeting moved on. I noticed something then. Not the correction. The absence of everything that used to come with it. Looking back now, that's when it fully settled. It wasn't just about him being gone. It was about what filled the space after. A few days later, I ran into Claire from HR near the elevators. We'd barely spoken before. Just passing interactions. She stopped when she saw me. Hey, she said. I nodded. Hey. A brief pause. Then, you handled things professionally, she added. Carefully worded. Not an accusation. Not even a compliment. Just recognition. I held her gaze for a second, then gave a small nod. Thanks. She smiled slightly, then stepped into the elevator. And that was it. No follow-up. No deeper conversation. But it stayed with me, because it confirmed something I hadn't needed to say out loud. People had noticed. Not what I did, but how I did it. That part mattered more. My new role started quietly. No announcement beyond a short internal update. No big transition. Just more responsibility. More visibility. Different conversations. And something else. Access. Information moved differently now. Not filtered. Not reshaped. Just clear. One afternoon, while reviewing a set of reports, I came across a familiar pattern. Not the same as before, but close. A minor inconsistency. Easy to miss. I paused, looked at it again, then leaned back slightly, because this time it wasn't about proving anything. It was about understanding. So I called the analyst over, walked through it, explained what I saw. No pressure. No audience. Just clarity. They nodded, adjusted it, fixed it, and we moved on. Simple. But it felt important, because that's where the difference shows up. Not in the big moments. In the small ones. The ones no one remembers. But everyone feels. At the time I didn't think much of it. But looking back now, that was the real shift. Not the meeting. Not the audit. Not even the outcome. It was what came after. How things were handled when no one was watching. A few weeks later I stayed late one evening. Not because I had to. Just finishing up a project. The office was mostly empty. Lights dimmed. Quiet. I stood by the window for a moment, looking out over the city. Same view I'd seen 100 times before. But it felt different. Lighter. Clearer. I thought about that first moment. Standing at my desk. The laughter. The silence. The way I just nodded and let it pass. And for a second I wondered what would have happened if I had reacted differently. If I had pushed back. Argued. Defended myself in that moment. Maybe it would have changed something. Maybe not. But I know this, it wouldn't have led here. Because this wasn't built in a moment. It was built over time. Quietly. Deliberately. Piece by piece. And that's the part people don't see. They see the outcome. The reversal. The moment things shift. But they don't see the space before it. The patience. The restraint. The decision to wait when reacting would be easier. I turned away from the window, shut down my computer, grabbed my bag. As I walked toward the exit, I passed the conference room. Same one. Door slightly open. Lights off. Empty. I paused for just a second. Not long. Just enough to register it. Then I kept walking. Because some rooms don't need revisiting. They just need remembering. Not as something to hold on to, but as something you've moved past. Outside, the air felt cool, steady. I took a breath. And for the first time in a long time, nothing felt unresolved. No tension waiting for the next moment. No anticipation of being called out. Just quiet. And clarity. Because in the end, this wasn't about ending someone's career. It wasn't about revenge. And it definitely wasn't about proving a point. It was about something simpler. Understanding that you don't have to fight every battle out loud. That not every truth needs defending in the moment. Some of them just need time. And the right conditions to become undeniable. If you've ever been in a room like that, where the silence works against you, where speaking up feels like stepping into something you can't control, remember this. You don't always need to be the loudest voice. You don't need to win the moment. You just need to understand it. Because when you do, you stop reacting. You start seeing. And once you see clearly, you don't need to force anything. You just position yourself. And let everything else reveal itself. That's when things change. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But completely. And by the time anyone else notices, you're already somewhere they didn't expect you to be.